Hello and welcome to World Have Your Say. If you're watching us for the first time, we're a BBC News programme which is always open to your contributions. And today we're taking part in the BBC's Aftershock season by looking at the role banks play in all of our lives. Do you see your bank as a friend or foe? Is it helping you to get through this economic downturn? Or do you worry that your bank has too much control over what's happening in your life? Wherever you're watching, you're very welcome to join the conversation. Call us on country code 44 2070 83 72 72. You can text us from your mobile phone on country code 44 7786 20 60 80, or you can email us at worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com or add a comment on the blog at worldhaveyoursay.com. Well, keeping me company here in the World Have Your Say studio, we have Ronnie, who's a lawyer based in London, and Charles, who runs a Nigerian restaurant in London. Good to have you both on the programme.
Hi, Rose.
But we're going to start our discussion with Alan, who's live with us from New York. And we turn to you, Alan, because this time last year, you worked for Lehman Brothers in the last few days of that bank's existence. Tell us about what that was like.
Well, I was an equity analyst at Lehman Brothers, and in those last few days it was very nervous and high-strung, but it was also very calm because people realized that the firm couldn't be a standalone entity, but people really were committed to doing their jobs. We really thought that the firm would be folded into another company. Nobody imagined that just 4 days from now the company would actually go bankrupt. That possibility simply didn't enter into anybody's calculations, even at this point last year.
And could you have imagined the amount of animosity which is poured out towards bankers around the world here?
Yeah, I think even after Bear Stearns, I think a lot of the animosity began. Financial services run in cycles, and there's, the party ends at some point, and there's a lot of finger pointing. And I think banks are one target that's very public and one that's very obvious. It happens a lot.
Well, Alan, it's great to have you on the programme. And just to explain to those of you watching, here on the screen we have guests in New York, in Paris, in Delhi. We also have Shaima from the World Have Your Say team, who's going to be updating your messages throughout the half hour. And also up here, your messages are updating automatically. So if you do post at worldhaveyoursay.com during the half hour, you may well find that your message appears up there. But let's turn to Charles and to Ronnie. Ronnie, you bank is your friend when you go about your personal life and your personal finance?
I have a very good relationship with my bank manager. He understands my business and my personal life, and he's helpful and supportive. And I think it's terribly wrong to demonise the banks in the way that they're being demonised at the moment. They were not to blame for the...
World Have Your Say think they are, because they took risks by lending to people, particularly in America, who couldn't afford to pay back the money they were lent by the banks.
And where were the regulators and the politicians whose job it was to create a stable financial climate?
So you say it's about regulation. Let's bring in Dr. Danny Lang, who's in the BBC's Paris Bureau from the University of Paris 13. Sir, we've heard there from Ronnie who's regulation, in particular in France, where President Sarkozy is talking about caps on bonuses. Is that enough regulation for you?
Thank you. Nice to be here with you. I don't think that that's enough regulation, because I would argue that what has happened with Lehman Brothers and with the subprime crisis is a direct result of the lack of regulations. So we cannot put the blame on bankers, but of course some of them are greedy, but we cannot blame them for that.
Well, that's an interesting. If you're watching, I just wonder if you're watching what you make of that. Two different guests, two different countries, both saying it's about regulation. It wasn't the banker's fault. If you leave the gates open, you can't complain when the cattle walks through the gate. Charles, you're here. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
How's things since you were last on World Have Your Say? I think we spoke to you on BBC World News about 10, 11 months ago.
Oh, yes, things were very, very hard. I'm glad to say we've just survived. We are still hanging on both in business. Appeared especially highlight the effect on us as a family, because we are facing an eviction due to subprime mortgage. And so I'm glad to say that we're hanging on.
Now, this hard situation, to use the word you use, do you put the finger of blame on the banks? Do you think the banks have a responsibility to help you out of the situation you find yourself in?
I definitely put a blame on the banks, and I disagree with my friend who maybe represent the banks. Maybe he's had a very good relation with the bank. I have had a good help from the banks, but I believe wholly that the banks ought to know better. They're in a better position because they have all the money and they take all the responsibility. They don't make the decisions. I have suffered from a personal point and also from a business. Given the situation that has happened in the last 12 months, I have not yet seen one single initiative from the bank to say this is what we are willing to do or this is what we're doing.
Ronnie, can I detect a slight sceptical look in your eyes?
Well, first, the bankers did nothing illegal, whereas we know only too well that many politicians have done things which are illegal. The bankers did their job for the most part. Some got it right, some got it wrong. Some took too great a risk. The bonus system is designed to reward those bankers who are really successful in what they do on a long-term basis, and they've been suffering.
And it's interesting that the House of Representatives recently in the state which say that if you get a bonus and you're a banker, it's got to be tied to the performance you deliver when you're at work. Now, World Have Your Say isn't just a television programme or a radio programme for that matter. It's also a discussion taking place 24 hours a day online. Shaima Khalil's one of the World Have Your Say team, and she's going to be keeping us up to date through the programme on the messages you're sending via Twitter, through the blog and so on. Shaima, what do you have?
Ross, this on Twitter from Ravin Sampat. He says, the bank is like a good friend with bad motives. You try to get away, but somehow you always come running back. And Morley in Dubai says, I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that actions inspired by greed halfway around the world have wiped out my savings completely. Abisong in Singapore says, I have been laid off since April due to the economic crisis. New jobs are very hard to come by, but luckily I still have some savings. And this from Tio on the blog, who says, yes, banks have so much control. There's been so much deregulation and rampant greed, and nobody's being held accountable. Now, you can join the conversation as well. I'll be looking at your comments on the blog, worldhaveyoursay.com, and on Twitter.
Shaima, thank you very much indeed. You can see that we've got so many guests that we're having to shift things around on the big World Have Your Say screen here. Aftershock is joining us from Delhi, and up the top here we have Sarah, who's a regular on World Have Your Say, and Chris is joining us. Sarah's in Johannesburg. Chris, you're on the south coast of England. Tell us your experience.
Welcome from Southampton. Yeah, up to 18 months ago, I was a successful businessman. My bank decided I wasn't successful. They then decided that they would put penalties on me for the last 18 months, which all in all cost me an absolute fortune in bank charges.
But Chris, let me ask you, penalties for what?
Penalties are the fact that they reduced I was running with an overdraft, and they reduced that overdraft by some £25,000 overnight. That overdraft was only there for cash flow purposes, and they reduced it down. They've now taken the overdraft away and given me what is known as a loan. Now that loan has got a much higher rate. You hear about the UK of 0.5%. I'm actually paying 9.5% on my interest to the bank.
Well, Chris, let me take your, apologies for interrupting, but let me take your example and bring in Ronnie, who I should point out is a lawyer who represents bankers in specific cases. You're not a spokesperson for the banking industry, but this is a story which we've heard repeated time and time again from people around the world who say, we had one deal with our banks, and now they're suddenly turning around and saying, we're going to change the rules on the money we're going to lend you, and perfectly good businesses are in trouble, such as Chris's.
It does seem to me that the banks can't win in the eyes of public opinion. On the one hand, bankers are being criticised for taking too many risks. On the other hand, when they identify a risky customer and ask for an overdraft to be paid down, or offer loan terms which are presumably no better than the terms you could get elsewhere, otherwise you go elsewhere, they're criticised as well.
Chris?